Translate this. I'll give your mother my job. The words struck the glass table like a gavel, making the crystal tremble and the air in the boardroom tighten. It was late afternoon on the 64th floor of Apex Tower, Singapore. The city outside gleamed in molten gold, the kind of light that makes people believe they own the world. Inside, Victoria Sterling, the iron orchid of Wall Street, stood with her arms crossed, power radiating from the perfect stillness of her posture. Around her, directors in tailored suits sat in uneasy silence, eyes darting between her and the small figure near the corner. That small figure was Malik Williams, 13 years old, the son of a janitor. His mother, Naomi, was mopping the marble near the doorway, head bowed, pretending not to exist. She had not expected her son to be here long enough to be noticed. But the billionaire had noticed him. A folder had slipped from the table, pages of a multi-million-dollar Japanese contract sliding like white knives across the polished floor, landing right at Malik's shoes. He crouched instinctively, gathering them carefully so the corners didn't bend. As he touched the paper, his eyes caught the rows of kanji characters, flowing, alive, familiar. He knew those shapes. He had seen them in the pages of old manga borrowed from a public library, where the air smelled of dust and disinfectant. He had studied them quietly at the back of the cleaning hall while his mother scrubbed conference rooms. He had learned not because anyone asked him to, but because words were the only thing in this building that ever spoke to him. Victoria's tone sliced the silence. "Hurry up, boy. Don't waste our time." Malik straightened. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to vanish. The city, the sweats, even his mother's anxious eyes. There was only the paper in his hands and the pulse in his ears. He looked at the first page, tracing one line of Japanese with his finger. Then, softly but clearly, he said, "Madame, this clause here, it's written backwards." A few heads turned. "In the Japanese version," Malik continued, "it says, 'The company accepts full responsibility for shipment delays,' but the English version says the opposite. If you sign it like this, Apex will be liable for every delay." The room stilled. Dr. Catherine Morrison, the COO, lowered her coffee cup, eyes narrowing not in anger, but in astonishment. The boy's pronunciation of Shohan Okura Sekinen had been flawless. He had spoken like someone who didn't just know words, but context, hierarchy, and respect. Victoria exhaled, her jaw tightening. "Read another one," she said, "if you think you're so clever." Malik nodded once. "The payment term uses Kenshubi Kara, which means from the date of inspection. But your English version says from the date of shipment. That difference could cost you nearly 8% of total revenue if delays happen." He paused, scanning the final clause. "And this part, Songai Baisho Oseikyu Dekiru, means your partner can claim damages for losses that don't even exist in your English draft. 3 sentences, $3 million mistakes." Nobody moved. Someone at the far end of the table quietly switched on the phone recorder. Naomi's hand froze on the mop handle. Her chest rose and fell, as if breathing itself had become a ceremony. Victoria's lips curved into a smile too sharp to be kind. Coincidences. Anyone can guess. She turned to the screen on the wall. Connect to Tokyo. Let's see how the prodigy performs in front of real executives. The screen flickered to life, revealing 3 Japanese partners seated in a minimalist conference room. Victoria began with a broken greeting, her accent cracking every syllable. Malik lowered his head, took a breath, and bowed slightly toward the camera. His voice emerged calm and measured. Watakushi wa Malik Williams to Moshimasu. Kono tabi wa taihen gomen nasaimasen deshita. The words flowed with a level of keigo, formal Japanese, that even seasoned negotiators struggled to master. The executives blinked, startled. One of them, older, responded quickly and smiled. The meeting, which had begun as a humiliation ritual, shifted direction in under a minute. Malik didn't merely translate. He mediated tone, intent, and unspoken emotion. He explained cultural nuances that the Tokyo team had taken offense to, softened miscommunications, and proposed revisions that both sides could accept. Within 10 minutes, the tension dissolved into respectful nods. The oldest executive ended the call by saying, "Your interpreter restored our confidence." The screen went dark. Victoria remained standing. Her hand, resting on the back of the chair, trembled slightly. "We'll have legal verify everything," she said flatly. "But this circus is over. We don't employ children." Her voice echoed too long. Catherine looked at the boy, then at the data on her tablet. "Victoria, his analysis saved us more than 20 million in exposure." 20 or 200, Victoria snapped. "He's not certified. He's not an employee. This is a corporation, not a classroom." Malik simply nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He placed the papers neatly back on the table, then returned to the corner where his school notebook lay open among his mother's cleaning rags. He picked up his pencil and began to write again, the faint scratching sound filling the silence like a heartbeat. The meeting dissolved slowly. Executives left in pairs, murmuring. Catherine lingered, watching Naomi gather the cleaning cart. "Your son," she said softly. "He speaks how many languages?" Naomi shrugged, embarrassed. "I stopped counting when he began answering TV channels in their own tongues." Catherine smiled faintly. "Keep him studying. The world needs more people who listen before they speak." When the last door closed, Victoria remained alone by the window. The city below was a chessboard of lights. She watched the boy's reflection fade from the glass as the elevator doors shut behind him. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. Downstairs, Malik and his mother walked into the humid Singapore night. The air smelled of rain and sea salt. "Were you afraid?" Naomi asked quietly. Malik shook his head. "No. I'm only afraid of knowing the truth and saying nothing." His mother smiled through tired eyes. "Then you're braver than most people who work in that building." Later that night, in their small apartment above a market, Malik spread the contract pages he'd copied by hand across the table. He corrected every mistranslation, drew lines between characters and meanings, and wrote 3 words on the last page, respect, responsibility, courage. He didn't know why, only that they felt right together. The next morning before school, he rode the elevator back to the 64th floor to return the pen he had borrowed from Dr. Morrison. The boardroom was empty. Only a single desk lamp still glowed, casting a pool of light over a new meeting schedule pinned to the wall. Among the printed lines, one note stood out, handwritten in blue ink. Immediate review, translation protocols, priority level red. Malik smiled, placed the pen beside it, and turned off the lamp. As he stepped into the elevator, his old phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Thank you, no name, but he didn't need one. Outside, dawn poured over Marina Bay, painting the glass towers in pale gold. Somewhere above those towers, a woman in a gray dress stared at her reflection and wondered when the world had changed beneath her feet. Malik looked out the window of the rising train on his way to school. The city moved like a language he was just beginning to translate. A language made of silence, dignity, and quiet strength. He opened his notebook and wrote one line at the top of a fresh page. The first step to being heard is daring to speak. The next morning, Marina Bay shimmered beneath a curtain of thin rain, and the world seemed to pretend nothing had happened the night before. But the 64th floor of Apex Tower had not forgotten. The air there carried a new kind of silence, one that tasted of embarrassment and awe. Victoria Sterling arrived before anyone else. Her heels echoed through the corridor like a metronome counting down to confrontation. She had slept barely an hour. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that boy, that janitor's son, standing in the reflection of the boardroom glass, speaking flawless Japanese to a screen full of men who bowed to him. Power does not fear ignorance. It fears mirrors. And Malik Williams had held one up to her face. By the time the executives arrived, she had already issued orders for a verification call. Her assistant whispered that Tokyo was online, waiting. Victoria's reply was crisp as a knife. Then let's finish what we started. Malik came with his mother that morning, quietly as always. Naomi pushed her cleaning cart through the corridor, pretending not to notice the stairs. When the door opened and she saw Victoria inside, she hesitated. But Victoria's eyes fixed only on the boy. You, she said, come here. Malik glanced at his mother. Naomi gave the smallest nod. Victoria pointed to the conference table where a new set of documents waited. Fresh printouts in Japanese, English, and Korean. You said you could read this language. Fine. Let's test you properly. Dr. Catherine Morrison entered moments later, calm as ever, holding her tablet and a cup of coffee. Victoria, perhaps we— Not now, Catherine, Sterling interrupted. If this boy wants to play interpreter, let him prove it. Catherine sighed, but said nothing. She knew Victoria too well. Pride had become her armor, and every dent only made her tighten it further. The screen on the far wall lit up. 3 Japanese executives appeared, the same team from the night before. Their faces were polite, expectant. One of them adjusted his glasses. Sterling-san, he greeted. Good morning. Victoria replied with a jumble of sounds that might once have been Japanese. The executives blinked, confused. Catherine winced. Then, without asking permission, Malik stepped forward. He bowed, precisely 45 degrees, and spoke in Kigo, the highest level of Japanese politeness. Watakushi wa Malik Williams tumoshimasu. Kono tabi wa taihen gomewaku o okake itashimashita. His tone was low, measured, filled with humility that demanded no forgiveness, yet inspired it nonetheless. The effect was immediate. The oldest executive smiled, deeply moved. "Ah, perfect Keigo," he murmured in Japanese. "Even our junior translators struggle with such formality." Malik continued. "We have reviewed your contract overnight and identified errors that may have caused offense. Please allow me to clarify on behalf of Apex Global Holdings." Catherine's fingers froze on her tablet. On behalf of Apex Global. The boy had just spoken as though he belonged here, and strangely, no one dared to contradict him. For the next 20 minutes, Malik navigated the conversation with the precision of a surgeon. He didn't just translate. He interpreted souls. When the Tokyo team's language softened out of courtesy, Malik subtly adjusted Apex's response to match. When Victoria's voice grew sharp, he wrapped her meaning in layers of Japanese deference, transforming command into collaboration. Slowly, the storm that had gathered between two continents began to clear. At one point, one of the Japanese executives spoke rapidly, his words tumbling with emotion. Victoria frowned. "What's he saying?" Malik turned, his voice steady. "He says the phrasing of our proposal suggested we saw them as temporary vendors, not long-term partners. He says that made them lose face before their board." Catherine felt her stomach tighten. That single nuance, lost in translation, could have sunk months of negotiation. "And?" Victoria demanded. Malik looked back at the screen. "He also says that if we correct the tone, they are ready to finalize the deal immediately." The room exhaled. Catherine caught herself smiling. Victoria, however, remained rigid. "Fine. Then tell them we'll make those corrections and send the new version today." Malik nodded and turned to the screen again, delivering her message with a bow and a sentence so graceful that even those who didn't understand the words could sense the respect within them. When the call ended, the Tokyo team bowed deeply. "We look forward to continuing our partnership," they said in English before disconnecting. Silence filled the room again. Victoria stood there for a long moment, her knuckles white against the glass table. Then, as if remembering where she was, she forced a smile. "There. Crisis averted. Thank you, everyone." The executives began to file out, murmuring their amazement. But Catherine stayed. She watched Victoria pour herself a glass of water, her hand shaking slightly, and then she turned to Malik. "How did you learn Keigo?" Catherine asked quietly. Malik shrugged. "I watched Japanese dramas, the formal ones, and I talked to people online who wanted to practice English. They taught me the tone that earns respect." "The tone that earns respect," Catherine repeated, half to herself. "Most adults never learn that." Victoria interrupted sharply, as though afraid of what she was hearing. Enough. This meeting is over. Malik, go back to whatever it is you do. Malik lowered his eyes. Yes, ma'am. He picked up his school bag, nodded politely to Catherine, and followed his mother out of the room. When the door closed, the CEO and the COO were alone. The city beyond the glass was silver now, clouds heavy with rain. Catherine spoke first. You know what we just witnessed, right? I witnessed an anomaly, Victoria said coldly. A boy who got lucky twice. Catherine smiled faintly. Luck doesn't conjugate verbs in perfect Kago. Victoria turned sharply, but Catherine's tone stayed calm. That child saved you $42 million this week. You humiliated him, and he still saved you. Maybe it's time you ask yourself why. Victoria's expression hardened, but her eyes betrayed something human, something that looked suspiciously like regret. After Catherine left, Victoria stood alone before the city. Thunder rolled in the distance. She thought of the way Malik had bowed, not low enough to grovel, but low enough to remind her what grace looked like. She whispered to the empty room. Respect, responsibility, courage. The 3 words from the boy's notes that Catherine had mentioned. Words she herself had once believed in, before success had turned them into slogans. Outside, rain began to fall harder, streaking the glass like tears that no one had time to cry. Downstairs, Malik and Naomi waited at the bus stop under a flickering streetlight. Did she scold you again? Naomi asked. No, Malik said. She tested me. And? Malik smiled faintly. I passed. The bus came, wheezing to a stop. As they climbed aboard, the clouds opened wider, and lightning carved a line through the sky. A brief, blinding crack that illuminated both the sea and the skyline. Neither of them knew it yet, but that call with Tokyo had sent ripples far beyond the glass walls of Apex Tower. In Zurich, an investor had just replayed the recording twice, asking, "Who was that voice?" In Seoul, a project manager forwarded the clip to her entire team with the caption, "This is how diplomacy sounds." And in the sleepless office of Victoria Sterling, a single note glowed on her screen. An internal alert from the Seoul facility marked urgent. A crisis was brewing. The storm arrived not through thunder, but through ringing phones. At 8:03 p.m., just as the cleaning crew began its nightly rounds, the Apex Global boardroom burst alive again. One call came from Berlin, another from Riyadh, then Seoul, then Sao Paulo. A chain of red alerts blinked across the glass wall of the digital dashboard, each carrying the same tag. Communication failure. Urgent review required. Dr. Catherine Morrison dropped her pen. She had seen this pattern before. Mistranslations rippling through a dozen departments like a silent contagion. One wrong clause in a German machinery contract had already cost them weeks of delay. A cultural slip in an Arabic partnership had frozen a 7-pounds renewable energy deal, and somewhere, deep in the financial fog of Apex's empire, a single misplaced word was always waiting to collapse another bridge. Victoria Sterling strode in, her silver heels striking the marble like sparks. "What's happening?" Catherine looked up from her tablet. "It's a cascade failure. 3 divisions can't reconcile their agreements because of translation gaps. Tokyo, Berlin, Riyadh, they're all calling at once." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Then route the calls through our translation service. That's what we pay them for." Catherine hesitated. "We tried. They're overloaded. Every channel says unavailable." Victoria's voice cut sharp. "Then get someone else." Before Catherine could reply, a soft, familiar voice came from the doorway. "I can help." Malik stood there, a backpack slung over one shoulder, his school uniform half untucked, his eyes bright but calm. Naomi was behind him, frozen in the act of setting down her mop bucket. Victoria exhaled impatiently. "Not tonight, boy. This is real business, not some language game." But Catherine was already rising from her chair. "Wait. Let him try." Victoria turned to protest. And then the first call came through. The conference screen flickered to reveal Dr. Weiss from the Berlin engineering team, his face flushed with frustration. "We've been installing the components backwards for 3 weeks, he barked. "Your manual's translation swapped left intake and right intake. Do you know what that does to the pressure systems?" Victoria froze. Catherine gestured to Malik. "Can you talk to him?" Malik stepped forward, adjusting the headset. "Guten Abend, Herr Dr. Weiss. Ich bin Malik Williams von Apex Global." The sound of fluent German filled the room, precise, formal, warm. The engineer blinked, startled. "Ah, you speak German." "Ja," Malik said, smiling faintly. "Let's go over the diagrams together. Page 12, figure B4. Within minutes, the tension began to ease. Malik's pencil moved across the digital whiteboard, sketching the corrected flow arrows while explaining in English for the Apex side. "It wasn't the engineer's fault," he said. "The English manual flipped the orientation because someone assumed all facilities were mirrored layouts. They weren't." Catherine scribbled notes. Victoria said nothing. The Berlin issue closed at 8:27 p.m., but before anyone could breathe, another alert flashed. "Call incoming, Dubai Consortium." Malik switched channels. The face of Mr. Al-Rashid, Apex's Middle East energy partner, filled the screen. His tone was icy. "Your latest proposal violates Mudaraba principles," he said in Arabic. "It implies interest-based returns. We warned you before. This is unacceptable." Malik's Arabic unfolded like silk. "Sidi al-Rashid, with respect, that was never our intention." The English phrase profit sharing was translated as interest percentage. "Allow me to reword it to match Sharia guidelines." Catherine, though she didn't understand Arabic, recognized the change instantly. The man's shoulders softened. By 8:44 p.m., the Dubai contract was back on track. Then came a third call, Seoul Biotech Division. This one didn't start with anger. It started with fear. A female voice trembling. "Please, we can't reach headquarters. Chemical leak detected. We need authorization to evacuate." Victoria turned pale. "Evacuate? How serious?" Catherine tried to reply, but the voice on the line grew frantic, half Korean, half broken English. Malik didn't wait for permission. Yogiseo malhejuseo, gamsa hamnida. Jonan Malik imnida. The Korean rolled smoothly from his tongue. He spoke rapidly, asking questions, clarifying details, eyes flicking between safety manuals on the screen. Then, turning to Catherine, he said, "They've found contamination in their reagent lines. They're using the wrong version of the emergency manual. The English one says 200 meters radius for evacuation, but the Korean manual says 500 meters. They're waiting for HQ's command." Catherine's breath caught. "Then they're still inside the danger zone." "Yes," Malik said, voice steady. 45 workers. Victoria pressed both palms against the table. "We can't authorize evacuations based on a child's translation." Catherine's reply came low and clear. "Then authorize it because you trust me." She picked up the phone. "Seoul facility, this is Dr. Morrison. Evacuate now. Full radius 500 meters. Do not wait for formal approval." There was a beat of silence, and then the relieved voice on the other end. "Understood. Thank you." When the call ended, no one spoke. The hum of the air conditioner filled the room like wind after a storm. At 9:26 p.m., all emergency channels reported safe evacuation. No injuries, no fatalities. Naomi, standing at the door with her mop, crossed herself silently. Malik took off the headset, rubbing his temples. His small shoulders sagged from the weight of too many words in too many languages. Catherine knelt beside him. "You did everything right." Victoria didn't respond. She was staring at the scrolling figures on her tablet. Loss estimates that had just changed from red to green. Dozens of millions saved in less than an hour. But victory did not taste like triumph. It tasted like humility. Finally, she said, "Get legal on the line. We'll need full documentation of these conversations." Catherine frowned. "To celebrate them?" "To protect ourselves," Victoria replied. "If this ever leaks, it'll look like we relied on an uncertified translator." The boy looked up, exhausted but still listening. "You don't have to mention me," he said quietly. "I just did what was right." That silence again, the heavy kind that changes a room. Catherine smiled sadly. "That's exactly why you should be mentioned." Later that night, long after the building emptied, Catherine found Victoria still standing at the window. "You could at least thank him," Catherine said. Victoria didn't turn. "If he were my employee, I would, but he's not." Catherine stepped closer. "Then maybe the system is broken if the people who save us the most are the ones who don't exist in it." Victoria's reflection stared back at her from the glass. Two women separated by light, one hardened by pride, the other softened by truth. "Good night, Catherine." "Good night, Victoria. But remember, storms don't destroy what's strong. They reveal it." When the doors closed behind her, Victoria finally let herself whisper the question she'd been avoiding all evening. What happens when the smallest voice becomes the clearest one in the room? Outside, lightning flickered over Marina Bay again, reflected in the polished surface of the apex tower. like a pulse, like language itself, crossing continents faster than sound. Downstairs, Malik sat beside his mother on the night bus, head resting on her shoulder. The city lights drifted past like fragments of untranslated dreams. "Did you save them?" Naomi asked softly. "I don't know," Malik murmured, half asleep. "Maybe I just helped them understand each other." Naomi smiled. "That's what saving means." The bus turned, and behind them, the tower's lights shimmered back to life, hundreds of windows glowing, as if the building itself had started learning how to speak. At dawn, the city of Singapore woke glittering and innocent, unaware that 6,000 kilometers away, another city had begun to tremble. The first message came at 5:42 a.m., stamped in red. "Emergency, Seoul Biotech Facility." By 6:15, the Apex Tower Command Center on the 64th floor filled with faces pale as glass. Dr. Catherine Morrison was already on the phone when Victoria Sterling entered, her voice firm but strained. "We have an active contamination event. Seoul reports a chemical leak in the reagent line. They're demanding immediate authorization for full shutdown." Victoria set her bag down slowly, as though the weight of it could anchor the situation. "What are the losses if we shut down?" 48 million in inventory, Catherine answered. "If we don't, it could be lives." The word lives landed like a stone in water. Ripples of silence spread across the room. "Where's the translation team?" Victoria asked, eyes scanning the monitors. "Still offline," said an assistant. "Korean channels overloaded. They've been trying to reach headquarters for 3 hours with no clear communication." Victoria's mouth tightened. "Then someone find an interpreter." Catherine hesitated. The slightest pause. One heartbeat of indecision that changed everything. From the far end of the room came a small, steady voice. "I can translate." Everyone turned. Malik Williams stood in the doorway again. Backpack, scuffed shoes, and that same unassuming calm that had begun to haunt Victoria's sleep. His mother waited outside, her cleaning cart parked neatly beside the elevator. Victoria's tone was immediate, defensive. "Absolutely not. This is an emergency, not another talent show." But Catherine's voice cut gently through the tension. "He's the only person in this building who's actually been able to communicate with Seoul. Let him try." Victoria stared at her, torn between anger and the raw edge of fear. Then she turned to Malik. "You have 5 minutes." The call connected. On the screen, the image was shaky. A dim laboratory corridor lined with yellow hazard lights. The air on the other end looked thick, almost visible. A woman's voice came through, rapid and desperate. Malik slipped the headset on. "Yogi seo malhe juseo, gamsahamnida. Jonan Malik imnida." His Korean was calm, formal, confident, the sound of a bridge being built in real time. The woman froze, startled by hearing her own language spoken clearly from Singapore. She began to speak faster, half crying, half explaining. Malik's face tightened as he listened. "They've contained part of the leak," he translated to Catherine. "But the vapors are spreading through the ventilation ducts. The emergency manual they have doesn't match the English version we issued. It's missing the section about evacuation distance. Victoria frowned. Missing? How? The English manual says evacuate a radius of 200 meters, Malik replied, his voice steady. The Korean version, the one they trust, says 500. They're waiting for headquarters to confirm which one is correct. And the correct answer is? Catherine asked. Malik looked directly at her. 500. 200 would leave 47 workers inside the danger zone. Victoria shook her head. We can't issue evacuation without confirmation from legal. Catherine stood abruptly. We don't need legal. We need lungs still breathing in the next hour. She pressed the intercom. Seoul facility, this is Dr. Morrison. Begin full evacuation, 500-meter radius, now. Malik relayed her words in Korean, firm and clear. The woman on the screen shouted orders behind her. Alarms began to wail faintly through the speakers. Workers in protective suits appeared in the background, ushering others toward the exits. Victoria's hands gripped the table. If you're wrong, Catherine, this is on you. I'll take it, Catherine said. But in her heart, she knew she wasn't wrong. Minutes passed like hours. The monitors showed live drone feeds of the evacuation, white dots of people moving through gray mist. The Seoul dawn smudged by chemical vapor. Malik remained on the line, translating continuously between headquarters and the Korean emergency response team. Building C is cleared, he said. They're moving to Building D. They need confirmation about which ventilation shafts connect to the central corridor. Catherine turned to her engineers. Find the blueprint. I already have it, Malik said softly. He tapped his phone, a cracked screen glowing with a PDF schematic. I downloaded all the facility manuals while doing homework. I wanted to compare how different languages handle technical words. For a moment, even Victoria was silent. He pointed to the layout on the shared screen. Here, if they close these two vents, it stops the contamination from spreading to the storage wing. Catherine relayed the command. On the screen, 2 workers in hazmat suits moved to seal the ducts. Then, finally, the alarms began to fade. The sound that replaced them was softer but heavier, breathing. Dozens of people alive, coughing, but alive. At 7:02 a.m., Seoul confirmed containment. No fatalities. The boardroom exhaled as if it too had been holding its breath. Catherine closed her tablet. 47 people owe their lives to a boy who hasn't finished middle school. Victoria didn't answer. She stood by the window, the first sunlight of Singapore breaking through the clouds and spilling over her reflection. Get a full incident report, she said at last, her voice thin. We'll need to prepare a statement. Catherine's reply came quietly. What will it say, Victoria? That our translation service failed and a janitor's son fixed it? Victoria's jaw tightened. It will say what's necessary. Malik unplugged the headset, setting it gently on the table. His hands were trembling now that it was over. He looked smaller suddenly, younger. A child who had just carried the weight of 47 lives and finally realized it. Catherine knelt beside him. You did something extraordinary. Malik shook his head. I just listened carefully. Outside the glass, the morning was breaking wider, the clouds tinged pink with dawn. Victoria turned from the window, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. She walked toward Malik slowly, stopped a step away, and said, "You're dismissed." It wasn't cruel, just empty, like a person speaking from behind an old habit. Malik nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He packed his notebook and stepped out into the hallway, where Naomi waited. His mother didn't ask what happened. She saw it in his eyes. She only put her hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Let's go home." That afternoon, Catherine submitted her preliminary report. Buried deep in the appendix was a paragraph she knew would never make the press release. The communication gap was not linguistic, but systemic. The boy filled it because he was the only one who still believed understanding people mattered more than policy. She signed it and looked out the window toward the sea. A cargo ship was passing through the strait, its deck painted with dozens of languages, none of which truly needed translation. Just listening. That night, when the city lights came on, Victoria Sterling sat alone in her office. The report from Seoul lay open before her. 47 names listed under evacuated, safe. She traced the names with her finger until she reached the last line, translated by M. Williams, temporary. She stared at it for a long time, then closed the file and turned off the lights. In the darkness, her reflection merged with the city beyond, and for the first time in her life, she didn't know which side of the glass she belonged to. By Monday morning, the world outside Apex Tower looked ordinary again. Taxis lined up beneath the neon blue sky. Tourists clicked photos beside the lion fountain, and the marina wind smelled faintly of salt and ambition. But inside the 64th floor, the air was different, quieter, heavier. It was the silence that follows a miracle when no one knows how to name it. Dr. Catherine Morrison arrived before sunrise. The Seoul report had kept her awake all weekend. She'd written it 3 times, once as a scientist, once as an executive, and finally as a witness. Every version told the same truth. 47 people lived because of a 13-year-old boy. And every version ended the same way. The system would never believe it. Victoria Sterling entered at 7 sharp, her steps clipped and certain, as if authority could erase doubt. She placed a stack of freshly printed pages on the table. "Our official statement," she said. "Reviewed by legal. Approved by communications." Catherine took the pages and read silently. The text was immaculate, precise, corporate, and utterly bloodless. Apex Global Holdings confirms that immediate action and cross-departmental coordination prevented loss of life during the Seoul containment incident. No mention of Malik. No mention of the mistranslation that nearly killed 47 workers. No mention of the boy who had bridged 2 languages, 2 cultures, and 2 worlds. "You erased him," Catherine said quietly. Victoria didn't flinch. "I edited the facts to protect the company. You think shareholders want to hear that a janitor's child is handling international crises? I think shareholders deserve to know who's actually saving them." Victoria poured coffee, her movements mechanical. "Dr. Morrison, You've been in this business long enough to know the truth doesn't pay dividends. Control does. Catherine's reply came soft but sharp. You're not controlling the narrative, Victoria. You're shrinking it. Their eyes met. Two women standing at the edge of an invisible line. One guarding the gates of power. The other holding the key she wished she didn't have. Before either could speak again, an assistant hurried in. Ma'am, finance just sent preliminary figures. Estimated losses averted. $78 million. Victoria barely reacted. Send it to the board. But Catherine leaned forward. Add one more line. The assistant hesitated. What should it say? Catherine's gaze was steady. Losses averted by unauthorized translator. Victoria's hand tightened around her cup. Delete that line, she said. Why? Because if the board sees it, they'll start asking questions. Questions I'm not prepared to answer. Catherine stood. Then maybe it's time we start preparing. She gathered her notes, walked to the door, and paused. The boy deserves recognition, not deletion. Recognition doesn't pay his mother's rent, Victoria said coldly. Catherine turned back. But it might pay his future. Then she left, and for the first time in a decade, Victoria felt the hollow echo of being the only voice in a room that had run out of truth. That afternoon, Malik returned to the tower after school. His mother had told him Dr. Morrison asked for him. The security guards had begun to recognize him by now. One even smiled as he passed. Saving the world again today, young man? Malik smiled shyly. Just helping with homework. He found Catherine in the small glass conference room overlooking the harbor. On the table lay a stack of documents. Is everything okay? He asked. She looked up and smiled. Better now. Catherine turned the screen toward him. A spreadsheet filled with numbers, signatures, timestamps. This is the official record of what happened in Seoul. It'll go to the board tomorrow. But there's another version, one they won't publish. Malik frowned. Why? Because truth makes people uncomfortable, she said, especially when it comes from the wrong place. He didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway. Catherine slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were printouts, transcripts of his Korean translations, notes of his instructions during the crisis, and the evacuation timeline. At the bottom, in neat cursive handwriting, was a single line. Translation and cultural mediation provided by Malik Williams, independent consultant, provisional. Malik stared at it. Consultant. Catherine smiled. You earned that title more than half the adults in this building. He ran his fingers over the paper, almost afraid it might vanish. Will my mom see this? She will, Catherine promised. But first, I want you to keep a copy, because someday someone will tell you that what you did didn't happen, and you'll need proof that it did. Malik looked out the window. Below them, the city glimmered, cranes moving, ships docking, workers in reflective vests speaking in a dozen languages that somehow kept the world spinning. Dr. Morrison, he said, if I wasn't supposed to be here, why does it feel like I am? Catherine smiled sadly. Because systems aren't designed for miracles, Malik. They're built for repetition. And you, my dear boy, are not a repetition. Later that night, when the offices emptied, Victoria sat alone again. The sole report glowed faintly on her tablet. Her fingers hovered over one line. Translator, unidentified. She hesitated. Then, with a sigh that sounded almost like surrender, she replaced the words with a name. Translator M. Williams. For a moment she simply stared at it. Then she saved the file. Across the room, her reflection shimmered in the dark glass. A woman who had built an empire from precision, now undone by something she couldn't quantify, decency. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Seoul. All workers recovered. No casualties. Thank you for your leadership. She read it twice, then whispered, Leadership has many voices. Outside, the harbor lights flickered like breathing. And somewhere on a city bus heading home, Malik looked at the folder on his lap, the word consultant written in black ink, and smiled. Not because he understood what it meant, but because for the first time, it felt like the world had learned how to pronounce his name. Tomorrow, he would return to class, just another student. But somewhere deep inside, he carried a truth too vast for textbooks, that the smallest voices sometimes hold the largest vocabularies for hope. The following Monday arrived heavy with humidity and unspoken tension. The top floors of Apex Tower shimmered in the early light like a crown of glass, beautiful, brittle, and full of echoes. At precisely 8 o'clock a.m., the elevator doors slid open on the 64th floor. Out stepped the people who thought they ran the world, executives polished to perfection, their briefcases clutched like shields. The emergency meeting had been called by Victoria Sterling herself. Officially, it was to review risk management procedures. Unofficially, it was to erase what remained of a miracle. Dr. Catherine Morrison was already there, standing by the panoramic window. Her reflection hovered beside the rising sun, calm, patient, but unyielding. She had spent the entire weekend preparing. Today, she would not whisper. Victoria entered last, heels clicking like a gavel. Let's begin, she said, taking her seat at the head of the table, the same seat where Malik had once stood translating life into safety. The chief financial officer began his report. The Seoul incident prevented potential losses estimated at 78 million USD. However, there are questions about the methods used. Catherine's voice cut through before he could continue. You mean questions about who was used? A murmur rippled across the room. Victoria exhaled sharply. Dr. Morrison, we'll address your concerns later. For now, the focus is on protocol. No, Catherine said. For now, the focus is on truth. She pressed a button on her tablet. The main screen flickered to life, displaying a recording, CCTV footage from the Seoul crisis room. The room filled with the sound of a young voice speaking rapid Korean, calm and commanding. Malik's voice. The executives leaned forward. On screen, the boy coordinated the evacuation, translating both technical jargon and panic into precision. Then came the silence, the breathless moment when confirmation arrived. All workers safe. When the video ended, the boardroom was no longer sterile. It breathed. "That," Catherine said quietly, "is the person who saved your company." A long pause followed. Then Patricia Carter, the oldest board member, spoke. "You're telling us a 13-year-old boy led our emergency translation?" "I'm telling you," Catherine replied, "that a 13-year-old boy succeeded where our certified systems failed." The CFO frowned. "This complicates liability. We can't publicly acknowledge him." Victoria leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Exactly. Thank you." Catherine's tone hardened. "You'd rather hide a truth that saved lives than admit your system missed a genius sitting in the hallway?" "Genius." Victoria's voice sharpened like glass under strain. "He's a child, a janitor's child. He doesn't belong in this conversation." Catherine met her gaze. "Then maybe the conversation is the problem." The silence that followed was electric. Outside, thunder murmured over the sea, as if the sky itself disapproved of the tone inside. Patricia Carter broke it first. "I've been on this board for 20 years, she said. "And in all that time I've watched talent walk out the door because it didn't look the part. Maybe it's time we start seeing differently." Victoria turned sharply. "Patricia." "No," Patricia said. "Let her finish." Catherine stepped forward. "Our losses didn't come from incompetence. They came from blindness. Malik Williams didn't just translate words. He translated cultures, systems, intentions. He understood that communication isn't about language, it's about listening." She opened another file on the screen, a graph showing Apex's failed contracts over the past year. Each red line represented millions lost due to cross-cultural miscommunication. Then she overlaid a new line, the last 7 days since Malik's involvement. The red turned green. 7 days, she said. That's all it took for one child to show us what we've been missing. The room remained still, but something had shifted. The old certainty, the smug comfort of hierarchy, cracked. Finally, Victoria spoke, her tone low. "Even if I agreed with you, Dr. Morrison, what do you propose? Make him chief linguist? Send him to negotiate billion-dollar deals between classes?" "No," Catherine said. "I propose we stop asking permission to recognize brilliance." She clicked again. The next slide appeared. A proposal titled Global Communications Specialist, Competency-Based Position. Hiring based on demonstrated ability, not degrees. Certification through performance, not pedigree. Malik will be the first, but he won't be the last. The CFO muttered, "This sets a precedent." "Yes," Patricia said softly. "A good one." Victoria's jaw tightened. "And what if it fails? What if your child prodigy makes a mistake next time?" Catherine didn't blink. "Then we teach him, not erase him. Isn't that what leadership is supposed to mean?" The room fell quiet again. Outside, rain streaked the glass, each drop magnifying the city below. 1,000,000 invisible workers moving through their day, unacknowledged and essential. For a long moment, Victoria said nothing. Then she pushed back her chair and stood. "Meeting adjourned," she said. But as the others gathered their papers, Patricia Carter's voice rose once more. "Not so fast. I move to vote on Dr. Morrison's proposal." A ripple of surprise. The board secretary looked up. "Do we have a second?" "Seconded," said the head of operations. Victoria froze. "You can't," but the votes came anyway, quick and decisive. 6 hands lifted, 1 stayed down. "Motion passes," Patricia announced. "Effective immediately." Catherine exhaled slowly, the ghost of a smile softening her face. Victoria's expression was unreadable, fury and fear warring beneath the surface of control. The meeting ended. The executives left, murmuring about policies, liabilities, and precedents. Only Catherine remained behind, watching rain blur the city into watercolor. A shadow fell across the glass. Victoria standing beside her. "You think you've won?" Victoria said quietly. Catherine shook her head. "No, I think we've started." Victoria looked out at the skyline, her reflection trembling beside Catherine's. "The world doesn't change because of one child." "No," Catherine replied. "But sometimes, one child changes how the world listens." That evening, as the rain faded into mist, Malik sat cross-legged in the supply closet that had become his sanctuary. His mother's cleaning cart stood nearby, the faint scent of soap and steel filling the air. On the floor in front of him lay a printout of Catherine's new proposal, his name at the top. Global Communications Specialist. He traced the letters slowly with his finger, unsure whether to believe them. Then he whispered, "I didn't even apply." From the doorway, Naomi smiled. "Sometimes you don't need to apply for what's already yours." He looked up at her, eyes wide. "Do you think they'll really let me work here?" She walked over, brushed dust off his shoulder. "I think they already do. The rest of them just haven't realized it yet." Malik smiled faintly. The hum of the tower surrounded them. Elevators rising, phones ringing, distant echoes of a world learning to speak a new language. Fairness. Outside, lightning stitched the sky once more. Not a warning this time, but a signature. The kind that marks the beginning of something larger than anyone in that tower yet understood. The boy who had once translated words had begun to translate an entire system, and the system, for the first time, was listening. The next morning, Apex Tower looked pristine again, glass polished, marble gleaming, and every corridor humming with the ritual of order. But behind that order, something invisible was moving, a quiet current of unease. A rumor whispered between assistants, analysts, and interns. "Did you hear? They're creating a new position for the janitor's kid." "No way. That's just gossip." "Then why did HR get an email from Dr. Morrison at 2 a.m.? By 9 o'clock, the whispers had evolved into questions, and questions into resentment. Apex had always been a temple to hierarchy. Every title carved in stone, every promotion a war of waiting. The idea that a boy without a degree, without a last name that mattered, could step into the ranks of professionals felt like blasphemy. But it was already too late to stop it. The truth had begun to leak, not through official memos, but through humanity. Catherine Morrison stood at her desk, rereading the proposal that had just been approved. Global Communications Specialist, Competency-Based Appointment. Underneath the name, Malik Williams. The ink was dry. The signatures were real. And the silence after that confirmation felt like the breath before a new language was born. Still, Catherine knew what was coming. The system would resist. Every system did when forced to see the people it had taught itself to overlook. She didn't have to wait long. Victoria Sterling appeared in her doorway, expression composed but eyes flashing like blades. "Congratulations," she said evenly. "You've turned a company into a charity." Catherine met her gaze. "I've turned it into something honest." Victoria's smile was thin as wire. "Honesty doesn't scale, Catherine. Structure does. You think one boy justifies rewriting decades of policy? I think one boy exposed what policy was hiding," Catherine said softly. They stood in silence, two women separated not by morality, but by what they were willing to lose. Victoria leaned closer. "Do you know how many employees are already filing complaints? How many legal questions HR is preparing? They're terrified this precedent will open floodgates." "Then let it," Catherine said. "Floodgates exist because someone built walls where there should have been bridges." At that same hour, Malik sat in a small room on the 22nd floor, the HR office. A cup of water trembled slightly in his hands as he read the document in front of him. "Welcome to Apex Global Holdings. Position, Global Communications Specialist." He read it again, still half convinced it was a test. Across from him, an HR manager, a thin man with too perfect hair, spoke carefully, each word dipped in disbelief. "You understand this isn't normal procedure. Most people here have multiple degrees, certifications. You have what? Middle school?" "Yes, sir," Malik said quietly. "But I've worked here for 2 years." "As a dependent of cleaning staff," the man corrected. "Not as an employee." Malik looked down. "Then maybe it's time I start being one." The man sighed. "You're young. Maybe you don't understand how this looks. People won't take it well." "I'm not asking them to," Malik replied, lifting his eyes. "I'm just asking to help." The HR manager paused, unsettled by the calm in his tone. He nodded reluctantly and slid the contract across the table. "Sign here." Malik picked up the pen, hands shaking slightly, and wrote his name in careful cursive. For the first time, his name appeared beside the company's logo, not as a janitor's child, but as a colleague. That evening, as most employees left for home, Catherine brought him upstairs. The 64th floor was quiet, lights dimmed, the skyline glowing beyond the glass. "This used to scare me," Malik said softly. "The way the lights made everything look so unreachable." Catherine smiled. "That's because you were looking up. Now you're looking from within." She showed him the corner office that had been converted into his workspace, modest but filled with light. A desk, two monitors, a bookshelf, and on the wall a framed quote: "Language is the thread that ties the soul of one culture to another." Anonymous. He read it twice, slowly, then whispered, "That's beautiful." "I thought it might remind you why you're here," Catherine said. "Because I speak languages?" "No," she said, "because you listen." Downstairs, however, the resistance had begun to take form. A group of executives gathered in the private lounge. Muted lights, expensive whiskey, quiet fury. The CFO was the first to speak. "If we let this stand, what's next? Factory workers demanding board seats? Receptionists negotiating contracts?" Victoria sat among them, outwardly calm but inwardly burning. This isn't about class. It's about competence, and Morrison just handed a child more influence than half this floor. Someone asked, "Can we reverse the appointment?" Victoria shook her head. Not immediately. The vote was recorded. Then what? Victoria stared into her glass, watching the ice melt. We wait. Every miracle fades once reality sets in. But reality had already changed. In the following weeks, Malik began reviewing translation systems, rewriting manuals, cross-checking linguistic discrepancies across Apex's global operations. Quietly, methodically, humbly. He corrected a German schematic that had been misread for months. He clarified a Mandarin legal clause that saved the company $4 million in potential penalties. He even helped rephrase an Arabic partnership agreement in a way that doubled their regional trust rating. Dr. Morrison watched in quiet awe. Malik didn't just translate languages, he translated meaning. Every email he sent, every note he left in the margins, carried the same subtle message. This can be understood better. And the strangest thing began to happen. Departments started listening, at first out of curiosity, then out of respect. Within weeks, executives were forwarding Malik's notes as reference documents. Clients began requesting him on calls. His influence spread not by title, but by tone. Yet, not everyone celebrated. Late one night, when the offices were dark, Victoria Sterling sat at her desk scrolling through internal reports. There, buried between success metrics and employee surveys, was something that made her pause. Unauthorized communications between specialist M. Williams and foreign subsidiaries, unsanctioned translation edits. Her jaw tightened. It was small, insignificant by normal standards, but to her it was the thread she needed. "Every system has a flaw," she whispered, "even this one." Upstairs, Malik was still working, unaware that the storm had begun again. He was reviewing a Korean safety manual, the same kind that had once failed so catastrophically. The city below shimmered in neon reflection. His mother texted, "Don't stay too late. You have school tomorrow." He smiled. Just one more page. The building hummed with the faint rhythm of air conditioning and night. Somewhere in that mechanical heart, a boy translated sentences while the system translated him, from invisible to inevitable. He didn't know that downstairs, Victoria Sterling had already begun drafting a memo titled Policy Review: Limitations of Non-Traditional Employees. He didn't know that for every bridge he built, someone was quietly reaching for a match. But he kept translating anyway. Because that's what people do when they were born between worlds. They keep building language even when others build walls. And beyond the glass, the sea kept whispering the same word over and over. A word Malik somehow understood in every language he knew. Continue. There are nights when even towers feel fragile, when the glass that reflects the city begins to tremble not from wind, but from conscience. That night, Apex Tower glowed like a ship drifting through storm clouds. In the corner office, Malik Williams sat at his desk. The skyline stretched before him like an illuminated map of everything he was never meant to reach. His monitors glowed with open tabs in Korean, German, and Arabic, the languages of contracts he had quietly repaired without ever signing his name. He worked with the focus of someone who had learned early that mistakes are luxuries the invisible cannot afford. But somewhere else in the same building, someone had decided that his perfection had become too dangerous. Victoria Sterling's office was dark except for the lamplight haloing her face. The memo she drafted, Policy Review: Limitations of Non-Traditional Employees, sat half-finished on her screen. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. She wasn't proud of what she was doing, only certain that she was right. She told herself this was about order, not ego, about protecting the system from collapse. If one boy could bypass hierarchy, what would stop the flood? Still, her reflection in the black glass window refused to agree. "You're saving the company," she whispered to herself. But the reflection's eyes said something else entirely. "You're saving yourself from change." She closed the file, then reopened it. Hesitation. That small crack where humanity tries to breathe through ambition. Then her phone buzzed. A text from the CFO. "He's sending unapproved edits to partners again. Legal says this could void confidentiality clauses." That was all she needed. She hit send. The memo went out to all senior leadership. The subject line read, "Urgent Review of Specialist Conduct." The next morning, Malik entered the building to a different kind of silence. The receptionist didn't greet him. The security guard who used to smile now avoided his eyes. On the 64th floor, people spoke in lowered tones that stopped when he passed. He sat down at his desk. The monitor blinked. Access restricted. Contact administrator. Confused, he went to find Dr. Morrison. But her office was locked. A voice behind him said softly, "They've suspended you." He turned. Patricia Carter stood there, her kind eyes tired. "They're calling it a review of conduct." "I didn't do anything wrong," Malik said quietly. "I know." Patricia hesitated. "Victoria's behind it. She's afraid. Your existence breaks everything she built her authority on." Malik felt the words sink like stones. "Dr. Morrison? She's in Dubai. Meetings." They waited until she left. He stared at the floor. "So that's it? They win?" Patricia smiled sadly. "No, Malik. They've just started a game you already know how to play better than they do. Translation. At noon, Victoria called an emergency board session. Her tone was measured, professional, and sharp as a scalpel. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "our recent experiment with unconventional staffing has raised serious legal and ethical concerns." Catherine wasn't there to defend him. Patricia was. Victoria continued, projecting emails onto the screen. Unauthorized edits to international documents. Direct contact with external partners without management oversight. Confidential files accessed outside approved systems. The board murmured uneasily. Patricia rose. "Victoria, you're deliberately leaving out context. Those unauthorized edits saved us from 3 lawsuits and an environmental violation." "That's irrelevant," Victoria said. "The boy is not certified. If something goes wrong, we have no protection." "He protected us," Patricia shot back. "From ourselves." Victoria slammed her hand against the table. "This isn't about morality. It's about precedent." The room fell silent. She straightened her jacket. "We can't afford to run a corporation on sentiment. He will be suspended indefinitely pending review." At that very moment, Malik was downstairs helping Naomi restock cleaning supplies. The janitor's floor was quiet, smelling of pine and steel. "Why aren't you upstairs?" his mother asked. "They locked me out," he said. Naomi froze. "For what?" He smiled faintly. "For doing my job too well." She sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "When your father died, I promised I'd never let the world break you. But I didn't realize the world wouldn't even have to try. It would just pretend not to see you." Malik looked at her, eyes bright with restrained tears. "Maybe being invisible isn't the same as being gone." Naomi touched his face gently. "You've changed them, even if they pretend you haven't. The ones who understand will come back for you." He nodded, though he didn't believe it. Not yet. That evening, when the last elevator dinged closed and the offices emptied into silence, Catherine returned from Dubai. The moment her plane landed, her inbox exploded with messages. Malik suspended, policy review, urgent board session minutes. She didn't even go home. By midnight, she was standing outside Victoria's office door. "Open it," she said through the intercom. Inside, Victoria looked up from her desk. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should he," Catherine said coldly. "Yet he was the only one who kept this company alive." Victoria sighed. "You don't understand what you've done. You've destabilized the chain of command." "No," Catherine replied. "You've mistaken control for stability. They're not the same." Victoria stood, voice low and trembling. "You think this is about ego? It's about survival. The moment you make exceptions, the system collapses." Catherine stepped closer, eyes steady. "Then maybe it deserves to." Their silence crackled. The city lights outside flickered like arguments, endless, glittering, unresolved. Finally, Victoria turned away. "You can't protect him forever." "I don't have to," Catherine said. "The truth already started protecting itself." The next morning, an anonymous email hit every board member's inbox. No sender, no signature, just a video file titled The Hidden Transcript. When they opened it, they saw security footage from Seoul. The entire translation sequence, Malik's voice guiding terrified workers to safety, his calm precision saving lives while executives argued in the background. The final frame froze on his face. A boy wearing a headset too large for his head, saying softly, "It's okay. We understand you now." The video ended with one sentence typed across the screen. "Talent doesn't need permission to exist." By noon, the video had leaked online. By evening, it had gone viral. And by the time the sun rose over Singapore, the world already knew his name. In her office, Victoria watched the footage play on the news in stunned silence. The anchor's voice was measured, reverent. "A 13-year-old translator has saved dozens of lives at Apex Global's Seoul facility. Sources say the corporation initially refused to acknowledge his role." She turned off the screen, her reflection staring back at her like an indictment. Her phone buzzed. Dr. Morrison's message appeared. "You can't silence a language that finally learned to speak." Victoria leaned back in her chair, the weight of consequence pressing down like gravity. Outside, lightning rolled across the sea again, the same storm that had witnessed everything. And in a quiet apartment across the city, Malik watched the same broadcast beside his mother, eyes wide, voice small. "Mom," he whispered, "they know." Naomi took his hand, her smile trembling. "Yes, baby. The world finally heard you." On the screen, his name appeared in headlines from Tokyo to Berlin to New York. But Malik didn't smile for fame. He smiled for comprehension. For the first time, he wasn't being translated. He was being understood. And across the ocean, in the tallest office of Apex Tower, Victoria Sterling realized something she'd never wanted to learn. Power can silence people, but it can't silence proof. Because once the truth finds its language, it never stops speaking. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of Apex Tower, slicing the boardroom into golden bars. Outside, the world was changing faster than any of them could control. The viral video of the janitor's son translator had reached 50 million views overnight. Every news outlet carried his name. Every social feed burned with one question: how could a billion-dollar company silence the boy who saved lives? Inside, chaos wore a suit. PR teams huddled over phones. Legal counsel argued in whispers. And executives who'd ignored Malik days earlier now scrambled to pronounce his name correctly. Victoria Sterling sat at the head of the table, eyes hollow. For the first time, she wasn't speaking. She was enduring. Dr. Catherine Morrison stood beside the screen, playing the news broadcast without commentary. The anchor's voice echoed through the glass walls. Sources inside Apex Global confirm the company attempted to suppress evidence of a teenage translator's role in preventing a chemical disaster at their Seoul facility. Public outrage has prompted demands for an internal review, with government agencies requesting official statements. No one moved. Catherine turned off the screen. We built an empire on communication, she said quietly, and forgot how to listen. Patricia Carter nodded. The world listened for us. 3 hours earlier, Catherine had found Malik sitting on the apartment balcony with his mother. The city buzzed below, reporters outside, cameras flashing. He wasn't smiling. I didn't mean for this to happen, he said. I just wanted them to understand. Catherine sat beside him. You did. And now the world does too. Naomi looked between them, eyes cautious. They'll hurt him for this. Catherine shook her head. They'll try, but the truth is louder now than any threat. Malik stared at his hands, small, scarred from hours of cleaning before homework. Do you think they'll fire me? Maybe, she said gently. But if they do, they'll have to explain to the entire planet why. Back at Apex Tower, the boardroom had fractured into two camps, one demanding damage control, the other demanding redemption. We have to issue a formal apology, Patricia urged. Full transparency, immediate reinstatement, compensation for the family. Absolutely not, the CFO interrupted. That video is proprietary footage. He had no right to record or distribute it. We can sue. Sue him? Catherine's voice was sharp enough to cut marble. You want to sue a child for saving your company twice? The CFO shifted uncomfortably. Emotion doesn't run corporations. Law does. Catherine turned to Victoria. And what do you think? Victoria didn't answer immediately. She looked out the window at the sea, the same sea that had mirrored every rise and fall of her ambition. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. I think the law is late to most revolutions. The room went still. Patricia leaned forward. Meaning? Victoria turned back to them, eyes darker now but steadier. Meaning we can't hide from this anymore. Reinstate the boy. Triple his scholarship. And make this company worth the headlines it's getting. Catherine studied her for a long moment. Why the change of heart? Victoria exhaled. Because I just watched my daughter replay that video 10 times. She said, Mom, he talks like peace sounds. The room fell silent. For once, no one argued. That afternoon, Malik received an official notice by courier, a white envelope sealed with Apex's embossed crest. He opened it cautiously, expecting expulsion. Instead, the letter read, Effective immediately, Malik Williams is reinstated as Global Communications Specialist, with full rights and educational sponsorship. Apex Global recognizes his exceptional contribution to cross-cultural crisis management and humanitarian communication. At the bottom was a handwritten note. V. Sterling, talent doesn't wait for permission. Neither should integrity. Malik stared at it until his eyes blurred. Naomi read over his shoulder and whispered, They're finally speaking your language. He smiled faintly. No, Mom. They're learning ours. By evening, the Apex Tower lobby was crowded with cameras. A press conference had been arranged. Malik stood beside Catherine and Victoria, two women who had fought from opposite ends of the same truth. Flashes burst like lightning. A reporter shouted, Malik, how does it feel to be the youngest executive at Apex? He looked directly into the cameras. I'm not an executive, he said softly. I'm a translator. I just help people hear each other. Another voice rose. What do you say to those who call you a prodigy? He paused, then answered, I say everyone sounds like a prodigy when someone finally listens. The room fell quiet, not the silence of shock, but of understanding. Catherine's eyes glistened. Victoria lowered her gaze. The boy continued, his tone steady and luminous. My mom always said words can clean more than floors. Maybe that's what I'm doing, cleaning misunderstandings. A ripple of laughter, then applause, the kind that begins softly and grows like dawn. That night, after the cameras left and the tower stood in hushed reflection, Victoria entered Malik's new office. He looked up from a stack of papers. Ms. Sterling. She hesitated at the door. Victoria, please. He smiled faintly. Victoria. I came to thank you, she said, and to apologize. I spent my life learning how to speak in boardrooms. You reminded me why we speak at all. Malik folded his hands. To understand? To be understood, she said. And sometimes to deserve forgiveness. She turned to leave, then paused. You once told the Soul team that misunderstanding can cost lives. You were right. But you also saved mine from becoming smaller than my title. He nodded. Then maybe we're even. As she left, she murmured, Not even. Just beginning. Outside, Singapore glittered under a soft drizzle. Naomi waited downstairs, looking up at the tower that had once been her ceiling and now held her son's name inside its walls. She whispered a prayer, not of thanks, but of hope, that someday every unseen soul in every hallway might find a voice like his. And on the 64th floor, Malik turned off the lights, letting the city's glow spill into the room. He picked up a new document on his desk, the first proposal for the Hidden Talent Initiative, a scholarship fund for workers with unrecognized skills. He smiled. Time to translate this too. As the night deepened, the tower stood taller than before, not because of its height, but because of what it had finally learned to hold. Not profit, not prestige, but proof that empathy, when spoken fluently, could rebuild the world. The world had moved on, but the echoes remained. Weeks passed since the video. Apex Tower was no longer just a symbol of commerce. It had become a monument to conscience. Every morning, reporters still lingered outside, though fewer now. Headlines had shifted from outrage to admiration. The phrase, "the boy who translated the world," appeared on magazine covers, school essays, and even a university ethics syllabus. Inside, the company was different. The air carried something new, humility. Malik Williams arrived early every day, as always. He still wore the same worn backpack, still rode the same bus with his mother, still stopped by the janitor's corridor before heading upstairs. The workers there now greeted him like family. Morning, genius, one teased. Malik smiled shyly. Morning, Uncle Raj. Upstairs on the 64th floor, The office plaque beside his door had been replaced. The letters gleamed under the light. Malik Williams, Director, Global Communication Ethics. He hadn't asked for the title, but he accepted it. Not for power, but for purpose. His work now went beyond translation. He was building what Catherine called the bridge beyond language. Apex had launched a new initiative to recruit hidden talent from within its ranks. The cafeteria workers who spoke 5 languages, the night guards who coded, the drivers who read philosophy on their breaks. For every overlooked soul, Malik designed a program to help them speak, write, and rise. He said the project wasn't charity. It was repair. One afternoon, Catherine visited his new office. She looked around, smiling at the sight of books piled high, linguistics, psychology, even poetry. "You've turned this place into a library," she said. He grinned. "Every language is a kind of prayer. I'm just collecting them." She laughed softly. "You're beginning to sound like Jung." He looked puzzled. "Who?" "Never mind," she said, smiling. "You'll find him when you're ready." Then her tone softened. "The board wants to name a scholarship after you. The Williams Initiative." He shook his head. "Make it Naomi's scholarship. She's the reason I learned to listen." Catherine's eyes shone. "You know, you've done something few people ever do." "What's that?" "You made the world quieter." That evening, the company hosted a small ceremony, not televised, not grand, a quiet room overlooking the sea. Employees filled the chairs, engineers, translators, janitors, accountants, and executives sitting side by side for the first time. Victoria Sterling stepped to the podium. Her speech was short, but the tremor in her voice carried a weight no rhetoric could hide. "Months ago," she began, "a child reminded us that systems don't make people better. People make systems human. I spent years defending perfection until imperfection saved my company." She looked at Malik, then at Naomi in the front row. "To Mrs. Williams," she said, voice cracking slightly. "Thank you for raising the teacher who taught us all to listen." Applause followed, gentle, genuine, unchoreographed. When Malik took the stage, he didn't speak from notes. His voice was calm, steady, the way only truth can sound. "My mom used to say that when something is broken, you don't throw it away, you fix it by hand, because that's how it remembers being whole. Maybe people are like that too." He paused, scanning the faces of those who once looked past him. "I don't know much about business," he continued, "but I know what silence feels like. And I think the opposite of silence isn't noise. It's understanding. That's what saved Soul. That's what saved us." He turned slightly toward Victoria and Catherine. "And that's what I hope we keep doing. Translating not just words, but hearts." When he stepped down, Naomi rose to embrace him. Cameras flashed, but no one noticed. Later that night, long after the room had emptied and the lights dimmed, Victoria stood alone by the window again. The city glittered like circuitry beneath her. She thought about power, legacy, and the strange grace of being humbled by a child. Behind her, Catherine approached quietly. "He's going to change the world," Victoria said softly. Catherine smiled. "He already did." They stood together in silence, watching the reflection of the sea move like breath against the glass. "Do you ever wonder," Victoria murmured, "why it had to be him?" Catherine's reply was almost a whisper. "Because those born unseen learn to see everything." Meanwhile, in a small apartment across the city, Malik sat on the balcony with Naomi, watching ships drift across the horizon. The air smelled of salt and rain. "Do you ever miss cleaning the tower?" he asked. Naomi chuckled. "Sometimes. It was simpler." He nodded. "Me too." She smiled at him. "You know, even when you were little, you never talked much. You just listened." "I used to think that was shyness." "What do you think now?" "That maybe you were waiting for the world to speak a language worth answering." They sat in quiet laughter and sea breeze until the city lights blurred into stars. Weeks later, a letter arrived at their home. Cream envelope, gold seal. It wasn't from Apex. It was from the United Nations. "We invite Mr. Malik Williams to join the Global Humanitarian Communication Council as a youth advisor." Naomi read it twice before tears filled her eyes. Malik looked at her and whispered, "Mom, we did it." "No," she said, smiling through tears. "You did it for everyone like us." He folded the letter and placed it in his pocket. Outside, thunder murmured over the horizon, just as it had the morning the world first learned his name. But this time, the storm didn't sound like danger. It sounded like applause, and so the boy who once cleaned the floor beneath the powerful became the bridge between them. He taught a tower to listen. He taught a system to speak. And long after his name faded from headlines, the echo of his work remained. In every factory, classroom, and meeting room where someone finally looked at the quiet person beside them and asked, "What do you think?" Because every great revolution, he believed, begins the same way. Not with noise, not with anger, but with the first sound of someone being understood.